AI developers asked Texas for 474 gigawatts of power. That is not a typo. It is more than 5 times the highest hourly demand the Texas grid has ever recorded. Roughly 90% of the new requests came from data centers. So on August 3rd, Texas hit pause. Governor Greg Abbott ordered the state's utility commission and ERCOT, the operator of most of the Texas grid, to audit every data center trying to advance through the connection process. But the most important word in this story is not gigawatts, it is requests. 474 gigawatts is not what data centers are using. It is not approved capacity. It is not even a reliable forecast of what will be built. Here's the truth bomb. Many of these projects may never exist, but Texans could still be asked to finance parts of a grid planned around demand that disappears. Think of ERCOT's interconnection queue as a reservation list for enormous electrical customers. A developer says, "I may want this site in this county by this date, and I may need this much power." The local utility and ERCOT then study what would have to change: new substations, new transmission, new stability equipment to serve it safely. That works when the list is short and the requests are mature. It breaks when companies reserve multiple locations, change their plans, submit early, or request far more capacity than they ultimately use. ERCOT's own June update shows how fast the list expanded. After duplicate requests were removed, the queue still grew from about 189 gigawatts in August 2025 to 466.5 gigawatts 10 months later. Data centers represented 421 gigawatts of that June total, 90.2%. Then the number moved again. By the governor's August directive, it was above 474. The queue is real paperwork attached to real locations, but it is not a row of finished buildings drawing electricity. ERCOT sorts these requests by how far they have progressed. Some have not submitted studies. Some are under review. Some have finished technical studies, but have not met commitment requirements. A much smaller group is approved to energize. Look at the year 2030. The full June queue pointed to roughly 451 gigawatts. Remove requests with no studies submitted, and the total drops to about 205 gigawatts. That remaining number is not guaranteed demand either. It simply has more work behind it. In June, only 8.9 gigawatts of large load was approved to energize, and the maximum simultaneous large load consumption ERCOT actually observed was about 3.7 gigawatts. Put 3.7 beside 466, and the difference looks absurd. But do not call that a 99% failure rate. The queue includes future projects at many stages, while the observed figure measures operating load at one moment. The honest conclusion is narrower, and more important, the queue is not a forecast. It is a stack of claims that require proof. If these are only requests, why should anyone outside an ERCOT meeting care? Because grid planning is a long bet on future demand. New high-voltage lines can take years. Substations, transformers, and stability equipment cost real money. Planners have to act before the customers arrive, or the infrastructure will arrive too late. That creates a trap. Ignore credible growth and reliability suffers. Treat every placeholder as inevitable, and Texas can overbuild for customers that never show up. ERCOT acknowledged that its older project-by-project process had become repetitive and unwieldy as large load requests flooded in. Earlier forecasts were distorted, in part because some data centers asked for service prematurely. And unlike generation in a traditional monopoly system, ERCOT does not decide to build enough power plants for every request. Texas relies heavily on market incentives. If demand and prices rise, private developers are expected to build supply. Transmission is different. Once approved infrastructure enters regulated cost recovery, somebody pays for it over time. That is why speculative demand can matter before a single server turns on. Texas has been adding guardrails since 2025. Senate Bill 6 directs regulators to minimize stranded infrastructure costs for large loads. For projects above the state's threshold, normally 75 megawatts, it requires disclosure of similar Texas requests that could cause a project to move or disappear. It also requires proof of site control, at least a $100,000 initial screening fee, and financial commitments tied to the transmission needed to serve the project. ERCOT then created Batch Zero. Instead of studying huge customers one at a time, it groups qualified requests, tests their combined effect, and sorts them by readiness and commitment. Projects willing to curtail during local constraints can earn a different path. Facilities that truly supply themselves and remain electrically separate generally sit outside the normal connection process. Then came the August audit. Every data center advancing through ERCOT must disclose who owns it, what incentives it receives, its peak and annual power demand, its on-site generation, its peak and annual water demand, its cooling system, and its community impacts. If a project refuses, the governor's directive says it should not connect. This is not Texas saying no to AI. It is Texas asking developers to put evidence behind the reservation. Which proof should Texas demand first? Power, water, financing, or responsibility for grid upgrades? Tell me in the comments. The audit also exposes a second planning problem. Texas does not have a consistent picture of data center water demand. The Texas Tribune reported that fewer than 1/3 of facilities answered a state water survey. That matters because a data center does not describe one water profile. A closed-loop system can require a major initial fill and then reuse water. Evaporative cooling continually consumes water to remove heat. Air cooling can reduce direct water demand, but increase electricity use, which may shift water consumption to power plants. University of Texas researchers estimate data centers could account for 3 to 9% of statewide water use by 2040, including water used directly and to produce electricity. Today, the share is below 1%. That range is wide because the basics are still uncertain: which sites will exist, where they will be, how they will cool, and what will power them. Public incentives raise the same credibility question. Texas offers qualifying data centers long sales tax exemptions in exchange for investment and job commitments. In July, lawmakers heard that only 20 of 138 qualified centers had been audited. 6 were out of compliance. The state's earlier estimate of foregone sales tax revenue was $3.2 billion over 2 years, and officials said it was probably low as certifications accelerated. This is where the story gets politically explosive, and where precision matters most. Texans are already paying more for electricity. The Texas Energy Poverty Research Institute estimates that residential prices in the competitive ERCOT market rose about 30% from 2021 to 2025. It projects another 29% increase by 2030. Its model identifies about $96 billion in planned transmission and distribution investment through the end of the decade. But that is not a $96 billion AI bill. Population growth, extreme weather hardening, ordinary grid modernization, new generation connections, and industrial demand all contribute. An industry-funded review by the consulting firm E3 reaches the other side of the debate. It found no quantitative evidence that data centers have historically been systematically subsidized by other customers under existing rate structures. Some large users may even spread fixed costs across more sales and push rates down. That study also says the evidence base is small, mostly backward-looking, and does not eliminate future risk. It recommends stronger forecasting, special large load tariffs, and financial protections to prevent speculative overbuilding and stranded cost. In other words, the historical case is unsettled. The future risk is real enough that both critics and industry-funded researchers recommend guardrails. Texas's governor has already directed regulators to make data centers pay for the electric infrastructure required to serve them. The unresolved question is whether implementation will keep pace with projects measured in gigawatts, not megawatts. There is a version of this boom that can help Texas. Credible data centers bring enormous private investment, construction work, permanent technical jobs, and tax revenue. They can locate near available capacity, fund their interconnection, add on-site generation, use water-efficient cooling, and agree to reduce demand when the grid is under stress. The Data Center Coalition told Axios it hopes the audit separates responsible water and energy stewards from those that are not. That is exactly the useful test. A serious project should be able to show land, financing, ownership, a realistic ramp schedule, a water source, a cooling design, and enough financial security that Texans are not left holding the transformer when the project vanishes. The goal is not to make the queue small for its own sake. The goal is to make it believable. For more evidence-first investigations into AI's real-world costs, subscribe. That is what this channel is built for. 474 gigawatts made the headline. The next number matters more. After the audit, after duplicate projects are exposed, after companies prove site control, power plans, water plans, and financial commitment, how much demand remains? If the number collapses, Texas will have learned that a speculative queue was being mistaken for an economic destiny. If much of it survives, the state will have a clearer map of the infrastructure, generation, and water it actually needs. Either result is better than planning in the dark. The danger was never simply that AI might use a lot of electricity. The danger was allowing an unverified request to become a public obligation. Texas did not freeze the future. It froze the assumption that every request deserved to be treated like reality. The grid should be built for customers who can prove they will show up, not for placeholders that disappear after Texans pay. Next, see whether your power bill is already funding big tech's AI war.